Hello everybody, welcome to my acrylic painting class. And today we're getting inspired by Poppies field. We're painting in acrylics on a grey board. That's kind of a neutral color for some of our pale blues, some of the greens and offsets of reds. Now recently we have been painting with a different red and green combination of colors. We looked at turquoisey, greens and more of a pinky reds. Today we'll be looking at warmer greens and some warmer reds as well. So let's explore some of our colors, and let's also look today at some of the lost and found edges. So some of our trees have really fuzzy edges, and we've got some sharpness of the foreground. At the same time, middle ground could be kind of disappearing and appearing. It depends how we build up our surface. So I'm going to start with a sketch. So I have a round synthetic brush. Let's have some white, and let's have a little bit of green and violet. So that will be our semi-neutral kind of green color. Okay, so I'm just making it quite runny. I'll talk you through the range of my colors shortly. Okay, maybe a little bit more violet so we can see it as well on my board. Okay, I can't quite see that, so let's make it a tiny bit darker. Okay, tiny bit more extra water here, so the paint is not too thick. Okay, I can see it there. Right, so for the sketch, I'll just use white, green and violet, but otherwise on my palette I have some white, cadmium yellow, ochre, crimson, some violet, phthalo blue, ultramarine, emerald green. Any other greens, if you have any warmer greens, would be great today, and some black. Okay, so let's start identifying some key components in our composition. Now, first of all, if I were to look at the whole photograph here, I quite like the layout of elements in there. Now, if I were to divide my piece into half horizontally, I can see that my horizon line for the sky is probably taking about a quarter of the piece. So if I were to divide my piece into half, roughly, visually, so my sky is going to be about halfway through. So I'm just going to remove my supportive mark, and I don't need those ones anymore once I've worked out halfway through area. So roughly somewhere here is going to be my line for the sky. Okay, now my tree is, again, if I were to divide my photograph into half vertically, it's almost, if I were to take the center of the tree, it probably will be a third. If I divide the whole piece into into three, that's probably where going to be the center of my tree here. And it's just gently, so if that's my roughly center of the tree here. And also if I were to look at that halfway through point, it gives me an opportunity to see how much tree is going to be going over to the left. Okay, I think it got a tiny bit shorter here. Okay, then my tree could have some lovely fluffy edges at the top. Okay, so we have our tree coming off the page, so it's cropped. It's quite a nice layout there. Okay, so these are my supportive lines, so I can just remove them now. remove my width of the lines there as well. So that will give me an opportunity to play with a tree shape. Let's just make it a bit more exciting. Okay, that's good. Right, and I also have, I'm looking up towards the field, so I'm kind of low within field of wheat or barley, probably barley, and poppies, and I'm looking up the field, and the field is going up the hill. So the trees, we can't see the bases of the trees. We can see some of the kind of basic branches, maybe tree trunks coming up. But I can also see other trees which are even further away up the hill. So there might be one here. There might be one somewhere here. I'm going to try to make them slightly different in size. Okay, maybe different grouping. So if these are too similar in size, but maybe the grouping of them will make it different. This looks like another one right in the corner here. Okay. There's some lovely clouds at the back, and it looks like we have a little bit of light right, well, quite close to the horizon, and that heaviness of the clouds is upon us there as well. When in this corner we'll have the opposite, we'll have something quite heavy and dark at the bottom and a bit more of a highlight above it. So something to consider for us later on. Right, let's have a look at the composition of the grasses and flowers here. Now, first of all, I have, it's almost like a lovely smooth line of the flowers going somewhere here. Okay, so I might just draw it as that lovely line, yeah? Maybe even just come in a bit more that way. Kind of the whole dynamics of it. And then I can decide, okay, so this flower is probably the largest one. Could be just off center towards the left. Okay, then it's almost like a little train of flowers could go above. They will be small as they're going further away. They're not so much going away, they're mainly going up in the air. But some of them probably going away as well. There's another flower to balance our reds. And there's another flower at the beginning of this lovely curvy line. It's almost as if it's even curls at the top there. Yeah, there's some other reds in there. So there is a nice red chunk here. And to balance it up, kind of height ways, something going there. Lovely. There's also almost like a diagonal line of reds going that way, and there is a lovely little red coming across. So there are loads of kind of dynamics could be found here. But the barley grains, yeah, the tops, all leaning towards right or going up. So I'm interested to find some of those grasses, maybe direction, some of the larger strokes. And while we have an empty board, it's easier to kind of manipulate those lines and change them, kind of play with them, decide if they're the right ones or not. Some nice dynamics of these grasses going down. So if I were to look at all of the field, I can divide it again into two sections. One where the lighter tones are staying, so probably up to the larger flower. Okay, roughly, it might be stepping into it, doesn't have to be all quite the same. Might be even going a tiny bit higher and tiny bit lower somewhere here. Okay. And the lower parts will have more shadows. Within our lighter section of the field, we'll also have some reds on the top, yeah, where the poppies will be more concentrated. Okay, let's come back to our barley. So there's a lovely stalk, really low here. Now we can lift it slightly up if you want to have a bit more of a character there for it. I've got some more supportive stalks coming out. Maybe one bigger than the other. Okay, so they're kind of going low, slowly coming up, coming up, coming up, and some of them up elsewhere there, yeah? So it might be how in this area the plants were or flattened by the wind, or maybe because of the area where the poppies grow, there's something going on. Okay, so let's have a look again. This one, that one. This is slowly coming up, so I can just even help myself to have that opening. Okay, there might be a couple of plants going quite high here, almost semi-vertical, and perhaps even kind of leaning away from us in the center. And again, everything else will stay supportive of the foreground. Okay, maybe those flatter areas of the field, again, how some of those curves of the plants are coming up. Yeah, so how the opening, maybe something else is here. All these ones can't quite see all of the plants, but they all kind of coming this way. Okay, so it's quite busy area here. Maybe there's another one coming from here. But I'm trying to look for some of the major or shadows or direction, some of the main leaves. Okay, maybe something's coming from underneath there. Maybe a bit more. So look at the curve here. So it's more flatter. Okay, so when I start painting, it will give me that opportunity to come back to those lines much quicker. Right, I'm ready to clean my brush and perhaps start with my sky. Right, let's now pick up a slightly larger brush. Well, actually, it's quite a large brush. And let's focus on our sky. I'm going to go for some white, some ultramarine. Okay. Now my sky is lighter than my field, but still I want to make it slightly lighter than my gray. Now I don't want my ultramarine to be too fresh. I want to have a tiny dab, don't know if you can see it on the tip of my brush, tiny little droplet of black. So it's a bluey gray now. And let's paint some of the shadows. Just checking the color against the sky here. I think this will be quite nice against the gray. This is a highlight I wanted to look at. So my shadows will need to be slightly darker. Now, this is not my lightest stone. I will have some lighter, bolder shapes, maybe just a little bit off center. Now, when we're coming close to the trees, don't be scared of painting a little bit further into the trees' edges, because we can make the trees painted over this light, but at least it gives us some painting behind the tree here. Lovely, fresh tones behind. Okay, here I'm gonna paint that little highlight above the shadow below. It's going to be slightly darker. So it makes our ridge slightly different. Okay. Let's have a little bit more similar tone and color. So have some white. We'll have some ultramarine. And a dab of black. So these are more of a, for the whole overall sky colors, probably going to be our medium tones. So we can get to more shadows, get some more highlights. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to paint over my highlighted area, but making them slightly bigger so I can expand the light in them afterwards. So for example, I've got a lovely light somewhere here. Okay. I have not runny paint, but reasonably thick, but it doesn't leave me loads of relief. Okay, so it's flattish strokes. It's my first layer, so I want to keep the strokes quite flattish. So if I need a droplet of water just to make the paint go smoother, I can do that. So maybe some of the highlights will come here and close to the tree. Okay, maybe this highlight could be actually slightly bigger. And there's something going behind the tree, that light. Okay, and perhaps the corner. I'll just remove my tape. Okay, for now. Good. Now my next step will be to add a little bit different color. I'll use some white and I'll use some phthalo blue, just a small amount. I want the tone to stay about similar to the darkness we just used. Okay. So then I can paint the lower end. Okay, that looks a little bit too light, or maybe similar, so maybe a tiny bit more darker for me. I want to have a bit more of a glow of that blue. So I'm just going to paint the lower set kind of borders of my highlights I just painted. So I'm kind of integrating, well, they're still damp. You might not see much difference in darkness on the screen, but you should see the difference in color. A little bit of darkness difference, but not much. Again, we're preparing ourselves for the bolder, lighter whites and for the much more exciting shadows. Okay. Highlight here. Now to make our clouds a little bit more interesting, a bit more vibrant in color, we can also add now a small amount of fresher ultramarine. So if I were to mix it next, if it will be slightly darker, it's okay. All I'm going to do now, I'm going to add this ultramarine in some of the sections where I just painted my phthalo blue. So maybe just make a little bit of an accent. Maybe a little bit more kind of variation of that color to blend. Doesn't have to be going everywhere. I think some of that could go slightly darker, perhaps into the shadows here. And again, the paints are still quite wet, so they do come in and blend very easily. Okay. And I think I'm ready now to go for a little bit stronger ultramarine and a little bit stronger black to have some shadows. Now, your white is your base color, so don't be scared of adding white, even if we're looking for a darker color. If it becomes too light, all you need to do is to add more ultramarine and a dab more of black. Don't want it to be too strong on ultramarine because our colors are far back. Shouldn't be too strong. We're painting the far background. Now let's have a look at some of the shadows of our clouds. So perhaps I could have a little bit softer edges, a little bit sharper edges. If you want to use tiny bit of water to smudge the colors in, or if the colors are still wet on your surface, that's great. Where I have not painted, or maybe where I can see a little bit more of a borderline, I can have more of a indentation, yeah, of that sharper edge, maybe at the bottom, maybe softer edge at the top. I'm just going tiny bit more upwards where I still have a lot of fresh paint. That's giving me that lovely soft edge. If you want to use the finger and the paint is still wet, that's great. If the paint's a bit, if paint is already drying, don't be scared of putting tiny bit more fresher, lighter paint, or just smudging some of your darker tones into that. Okay, now this is going to be part of my tree, so I don't need to paint too far. Put somewhere on the border here. Okay. Maybe some of these colors are a little bit too sharp, so let's just blend it a little. If your brush is too full of color, you can use a second brush to help yourself out, or just kind of use the side of the brush a little to have slightly soft edge. Okay. As I said, don't be scared of using a finger. Okay, I've got some nice shadows maybe coming across here, so I want to paint. If my green line is still wet and it blends with my blue, that's an advantageous position, but hopefully it should be dry by now. Advantageous position because it varies the color. Okay, a little bit more something here, maybe with slightly more white, doesn't have to be as dark here. On the corner. As we're going up into the sky, the shadows perhaps a little bit softer. We haven't done any of the lights, smudges. Some nice depth to it. And that's part a little bit covered with a tree, so I'm not too worried. And there was something tiny bit more darker here at the border. So I can take slightly darker here as well. Now, my border with the field, the light of the sky, don't want it to be all perfectly the same. So I might just dab a few colors here and there, just to make it slightly varied, even if we're not going to see much. It's fantastic practice for us just to be aware how varied the colors can be, should be. Okay, now I'm going to wipe my brush while the colors are still damp, because we're painting small area. Just checking if there are any awkward shapes, if I can bring any other color to smudge it. And also we need a little bit of extra fresh light. I actually might go for a slightly different brush. I might go for a flat round edge brush, filbert brush, because I know the tops of my clouds is easily done with that. So if I'm using a little bit of white or an off-white, or maybe a dab of fellow blue, just so to make it just an off-white. Okay, that's quite strong. Darker blue. So just glowing white with a hint of that freshness of the blue. I don't want it super fresh white because it will just start glowing too much. You can always make it light. Okay, I'm picking up more and more blue here. Right, and I can come back to my middle tones and actually look for the highlights of some of these clouds. Make the tips of them a little bit more exciting, maybe a little bit more varied. Okay, if the strokes tell you to proceed further and making maybe bigger shapes, go ahead. If your strokes a little bit more softer and gentler than in the photograph, that's good as well. Kind of go with the flow to create that lovely atmosphere of the clouds, kind of depths. I don't want the strokes to be too similar to same. Okay. Be part of that sky close to the horizon could have a little bit of that light. And this one I just have a small dab, and that's enough. And this side, have a little bit more boldness of the light between the trees and the lower section, and maybe somewhere. It's almost like glowing light, yeah. Because these strokes are a little bit more precise if they come out with more of a contour, with a bit more of line of the shape. We can soften part of them. So what I'm doing, I'm washing my brush and drying it, taking most of the white off, and while the paint on the piece still damp, I can just soften some of it. Okay, maybe soften some of the bottom edges. They blend with existing colors. Again, it doesn't have to be all done. Just see what works. Maybe you will bring some of the thicker strokes back. I think we're doing pretty well here. Okay, I'm going to stop at that. And let's have a look at some of our grasses. Right, our grasses will have some cooler greens and warmer greens. But as we divided our field into two big sections of the lighter tone and the darker tone, let's just do a little bit of blocking first so we can see that almost like the top of the field. That's almost like the width, the depth of the field. So again, I'm going to go for my bigger brush. I'm going to load it with some white. I'm going to load it with some ochre. I'm going to paint the top part of the field first, perhaps. By the time I'll work out my colors. I'm going for some emerald green. This is a lighter section for the sky. Just going to do a little dab to try the color. I think that will be one of the nicest colors there, but I could do with a tiny dab of red in it to make it slightly more deeper. Okay, if it becomes too browny or too kind of reddish, tiny bit more green back and some ochre back. Okay, I think I've lost my red now in this color mixture, so let's bring some red back. That's better. Let's do that one again there. Okay, it's good, but it's a little bit too dark, so all I need to do is to add some more white to it. So I'm testing it against my painting. I think some of that color will be really good as well, but maybe close to the horizon. So it's a lighter version of it now. Okay, so let's paint overall field. Now, because I already made the strokes of the grasses, all I'm going to do is to roughly leave them. So it just gives me a little bit more of a reference point, or any other lines. So for example, this one is where the pinks are going to go. So I'll leave some of this one out. Some here could have some other color as well. We can subdivide our field, but the top part of it, okay, we can paint over our green lines, the green line for the horizon. So then that darker line's gone. I can just give my strokes just a little bit of direction as well, keeping them reasonably flat or following those directions of the stems of future grasses here. Okay, so we're almost like painting little gaps. That's lovely warmth in there. I think it could do with a little bit of coolness at some point. Okay. Now, while I've got this color, I can see that it's also corresponds to some of the stems and some of the barley tops. So for example, some of these larger strokes we can make for the curved barley. Okay, something coming through it up. Okay, so I'm just going to use almost as a drawing, almost as a guide of color and light, and connect my backdrop of the field with the foreground. Okay, some of these ones got almost like individual seedlings. Okay, I'm making them quite big because they're right in front of me. I don't have to count them to 100. Yeah, just simplify them. There's another one coming through, even if it's partially in the shadow, it's also have partially some light. There's a lot of light coming through here of a group of barley. So I'm interested into that light. I'm interested into that direction. Okay, something happening here. Maybe my poppy will need to go slightly higher. Or maybe it will be quite nice here. Let's have a look. Okay. Now, lower than my field, the color of my field, I just want to change the color slightly. I want to make it slightly cooler. So if I'll go for extra white and ultramarine, again, on its own, it becomes too strong, ultramarine. But if I add a bit more red, okay, and let's check this color against our surface. It's very similar to the darkness of my gray, so it's harder to see so far on the surface here, but it's made it slightly darker. I think I could go even darker in some places. I'll start with this subtone, kind of on the edge of that field for the moment. And maybe some more of the stems, which will have loads of highlights. I'll just get them roughly in position, because those shadows in the foreground is going to be all dark. And I just don't want to get lost with the volume of that darkness. Okay. Something coming this way. So now I'm looking for more of a light. My strokes are flattish, don't have as much color in there or thickness in them. Okay. Right, and now let's start bringing more darkness to our field. So again, I still need my white, going for more emerald green. Some violet this time. So that comes out quite dark bluish green, violetish green, and some ochre. That's what makes it slightly warmer. Okay, I can go with a tiny bit more deeper green and violet. Now I'm interested into some of the shadows. Now, if your paint collects at the base, like for me in the brush, just press on it against the palette to take the chunks of paint off. Then it could be collected by the top of the bristles, and the base of the brush is staying much more thinner and clear of the paint. Just a little tip there. Right, so let's have a look at some of those earlier shadows at the far end of the field. So we have something further lighter, tiny bit more changing in color and darkness. And we're going to go for some of the shadows. So let's have a look for some of the patterns of those darker shadows, earlier starting kind of in between shadows. As I was putting some of the lines for perhaps some of my directions of the barley leaning, I can follow the same strokes for some of the shadows there. Okay, so something's coming here and darker behind my flowers. That one gonna come here. So I'm looking for blocks of pattern. Okay, there might be something else coming here. A bit more of how the grasses fold away. Okay, in a similar way, but maybe a smaller version of it. And that color could start going a little bit more up into the field. Some of my strokes will be coming out in a similar color. Those are more distant shapes and distant grasses. Okay, and now I'm coming closer to the foreground, and I'll continue with the same color, and then I'll start getting it slightly darker. So let's continue with it. Perhaps in this corner. And I'm also going to start looking for some of those, almost what we did with the lighter green initially, some of the strokes first, and maybe some of the shadows behind them afterwards. Just quite basics to show that overlap. Okay, these barley seeds. Again, I'm not trying to be perfect with them, just trying to look out for some of the patterns. There are too much details for me to proceed with, so I'll work in a simplified way. Okay, it's a big shape of light. I just need to be supported with this slightly darker shadow. Sometimes you just need to go and fill shapes or fill spaces. For example, if it looks too much lightish gray, let's just fill some of it. Okay. And does it mean that I've done all of my major kind of areas with this color? No, it doesn't have to be. But at this stage, it feels right. How it feels. I can always come back to it. So don't feel you have to be finished. Let's say with you kind of using this color or this darkness. But it does help us to get started somewhere. Okay, kind of not to be too lost into that variety of shapes. Okay, now what I'll do next, I'm going to go for much darker tone. Again, I'll go for emerald green and some violet. And I'll establish some of the deeper shadows, as we worked a lot into the medium tones so far. Okay, so some of the shadows will be as dark as my tree, but I'm going to choose slightly different colors for the tree and the shadows under the grasses, so they will look different. So let's have a look. Now, I don't have to paint super accurately, but what I will do, I will block a lot of spaces, just simply going and covering the gaps between the grasses here. Tiny bit more darker, so it doesn't look too pale. Otherwise, we'll end up just repainting areas. Okay, so if I'll start with perhaps just painting the gaps. Sometimes those gaps look awkward and odd, and you can continue them maybe in a shape of a line or in the shape kind of finding another form to lead it into. So suddenly from a lighter medium green, I'm going into the darker one, and it disappears again, and it might appear again. Yeah, some of these seeds will come in. Again, I don't have to do all these details, but it tells me, oh, okay, that's my character branch. So before I even get other shapes going, I need to remember it is my character focus point section. So it's not going to get lost. Okay, so let's fill some of the spaces here in the foreground. I'm using a big brush, so I'm not going to get lost into that volume of tiny details. I deliberately kind of give myself that task. I think this line could go, it just stops the whole flow. Because I can work into little things, but it's way too early and I'll stop seeing the whole image. Now it starts seeing much better. This shape. Okay, maybe some more gaps here. If you feel strongly about an area where you should or shouldn't put extra darkness, experiment and allow yourself to try those areas to be darker. See how it feels. So if I've done an area and it just looks a bit too boxed up, I need to support it elsewhere. So then that shadow comes in from somewhere else. Yeah, it supports the depth. Okay. See if that's will reflect more or less. If I okay, let's reflect a little bit more. Maybe let's work on that area. Slightly lower, it reflects less, it's just this specific corner. As the paint will be drying, it will start reflecting in the camera less for you. There's loads of texture here, and if my brush allows me to do a little bit of playful stroke, I'll give it a go. If not, I'll leave it. Kind of quite vague texture coming in here. Yeah, let's focus, continue with the shadows. Yeah, that's quite a lot of chop, 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 chop areas. So let's maybe simplify something. Yeah, perhaps that's too much. So first of all, I was filling things up. Now I started to look a little bit more and analyze the area. And that's when I can simplify it a bit more. So we allow ourselves kind of to work from simple tasks, just filling the gaps, to looking what we actually have in front of us. Okay, and both are important. Okay, let's have a look now. Now the areas become smaller, so I need to have a little bit more finer control with my larger brush here. Still quite thin strokes, not relief, not too thick in volume of paint, but not runny. Okay, somewhere in the corners here. think now I can slowly go over some of my previous greens. We've got two whites here to go as well. Oops. That's not my palette, that's my image. Okay, some more shadows somewhere here. Some of my paint is still wet. So when I'm applying the color, it's blending a little. Again, that could be a good thing. But also I might certain areas wait and let it dry. Okay. Let's could have slightly more darkness. Again, doesn't have to be going too jumpy dark. I've just tiny bit more softened it. That darkness was a little bit of extra, perhaps white and ochre. It's so minuscule. It's kind of it's close, but it's not quite there. Now I still have quite a bit of area here not filled, so let's just block it in for now, as I haven't decided what to do with it. If I want to see my grassy kind of big element here, maybe I'll go with slightly lighter color around it, so then it's not getting lost. Okay, not too sure about this lineup of the light. I think it will be much more settled by the time I start actually working with the colors around it a bit more. I've got a big V shape. Those are all strange shapes. Again, maybe I'll just soften it so it's not too jumpy at me. And there are loads of things still very busy now. Okay, but we blocked most of the areas now. And we can start introducing some of the reds, and we start introducing other colors much more thicker, and also the big shadows for our trees. Right, now let's have a look at our trees. I have a slightly larger filled brush now. Put it against here. And let's find the green for them. Again, I'll always load my brush with a small amount of white, even if it's a small quantity, just to make the colors less transparent. Although I'm going to go for quite a dark color. I'm going to go for some ultramarine and quite a lot of violet, and even perhaps a dab of crimson. Okay, so I'm looking for some sort of very dark reddish green. Okay, maybe still a tiny bit more of that red. Now to paint our tree, now our tree is very dark. Okay, but all our trees are very dark. But to paint it so it stands out in a distance, but it is dark. Now, if I put a dab of a stroke here, okay, it's immediately make the tree on the foreground standing really too close to us. We need to soften that effect. So although I want to use some of the darkness, I'm going to create the edges of the tree much softer. So if I'm happy with this color, if I'll just dilute it here, it's more of a grayish, reddish kind of color, violetish color there. Okay. If I were to use a little bit of white, I'll start softening it. There should be a dab of green there as well. It's kind of borderline of green and red, green and violet, red and violet. So those three colors are together, and I could have those borders slightly changing from one to another. So that's my diluted version of it, or diluted with white. It's a little bit better, but still not quite there. So again, I'll keep going, making it slightly lighter. So I'm looking for the darkness for the tree edge, which will be darker than the cloud shadows, or just about, well, it need to be darker than the cloud shadows. Some of my clouds ended up quite dark, but it's okay to get them slightly lighter. So let's get those edges soft first. Приветик. Приветик.
Привет.
So let's try this stroke now against the sky. That looks better. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to work out my tree again. Now I've lost its shape, so I'll just gently go around and find the reference point for it, for its edges. Okay, somewhere here on the right. And let's find it a little bit more somewhere here on the left. Maybe slightly wider at the top. If I've done the widths or underdone it, I can always expand it as I start using the darker tones. So it'll be easier for us to see the darker tones afterwards. Now, part of the tree also have almost like gaps of light. So I'm going to use this lighter grayish green here as well. And also perhaps somewhere close to the field, just a little bit. I might, again, over exaggerate in the volume of it, but also I have my whites here. I want to kind of to work with them a little. Okay, next one, I'm going to go for my slightly darker version. Okay, and start integrating some of that darkness now against the wet surface. I might need to go much darker, otherwise it will become very light. I'll go slightly darker, it will merge better. Okay, if it doesn't work, I can mix some more of that fresh red, green, and violet. Okay. And I'm going to try to keep my tree, if I'm dabbing on the corners to show the silhouette, or kind of how some of them borders becoming a bit more solid. The middle, I'm going to try to keep flat. So using some bigger strokes, so our tree will start to have a little bit of volume, but overall, it appears as a silhouette shape. Okay, I think I could make some of my lighter strokes tiny bit out here, but I can come back to that. Again, I can make some of these tree trunks, blocks, my lighter, smaller tree there. Maybe I can do my lighter trees here the same way, tiny bit lighter first. It's going around my smaller tree here. Okay, with those trees will be just very light first initially. And then again, slightly darker for the center. Okay, now some of my strokes, my darker strokes, almost touches the surface with the sky, kind of connects to the sky. But most of them will be within that lighter block. Also be careful not to make the strokes too green. I'd prefer them to be a little bit more violet or red rather than too green, because that stronger green will have to come to the foreground. So I'm working on one tree and I'm working on another trees at the same time. I want them all kind of sit within the same depth. The less details I'll do, the easier the trees will read as shapes for the distance. Okay, the more I'll start fiddling with the strokes, the more I'll start creating the volume, and I want to see them so far flattish. So the darkness will come up through that blob of tiny bit more in the center. That's better. So that's how we create the lovely soft blended edges. Good. If I want the trees to be even more stronger coming through, I'll add a bit more violet and red with some green. There will be hardly any white on my brush. And I'll just do a couple of strokes, especially close to the ground, which will make my trees just almost extra glow. If I'll start with the smaller ones, I think it might be a little bit easier for us because they're easier to manage. Okay, just a stroke and the whole shape becomes much more three-dimensional. Just a stroke, maybe off center, doesn't have to be in the center, maybe an individual stroke, maybe with the connection with the field. Maybe those two will connect totally. Okay, maybe too strong. I might need to have a lighter stroke between those two. Because suddenly that contrast is too great. That's better. Okay, and I can go for similar darkness. I'm just going to top up the volume of paint on my palette. For my larger tree. Now, this time I can pay attention where I'm going to put those strokes. Perhaps there will be a little bit of light at the top of the tree and some of the branches, but underneath of these branches, we can have a little bit of extra volume, which will give us the weight. That's kind of a middle row of branches. That's maybe the top row somewhere there. It's going to make those strokes a little bit more different so they don't look the same as my brush strokes. Maybe something will come in between, and maybe something a little bit more heavier at the base. Okay, a bit too much green by accident here. So some of these tree trunks will have that little bit extra depth. But overall, we should see the shape of the tree rather than too many broken dabs. I know this one should settle into my silhouette of the tree, and if it doesn't, I might need to come back and soften some of it. Okay, that's better. It makes it much more glow, much more glowy. Now I have a couple of corners where my paint's going a little bit too sharp, so I'll have some lighter color. Perhaps we'll just add a few more softer edges there. And if I wanted to make any more indentations or little gaps, I think some of these ones have gone a little bit heavy-handedly, but that's okay. I prefer to do that and get back to the shapes rather than lose that flatness of the color. Okay, this is quite wet, so harder to do anything there. I need to be patient. Perhaps some of these shapes come out a little bit too rigid, so I'll soften some of them as well. Maybe some of that light will come in later, behind the tree and the sky. Because I'll need a fresher blue. So if I'll use my white and the more phthalo blue in that area. Might be quite a lot of wet paint here, so if I'll just do a little bit and see how it settles, and then come back to touch things up. Just don't like too perfectly round edged shapes here. Again, that's my nuances work. Perhaps something to come back to as the paint will start drying. Because a little bit too perfectly round in some areas. I think it's my filbert brush which allows me to do some fantastic roundish shapes, but sometimes it's too perfectly round. Okay, that's more there. So just blocking a little bit here and there, make that perfection. More palatable, more natural. So they're not just blocks of dark, they are interactive shapes of trees there. That's better. I'm happy with that. Okay. Oh, I've done it a bit again, I can come back to it. Okay, this is all really good. So now I have two brushes, one with very dark greens and one with almost like sky whites. Both colors now could come to my field. So some of the shadows would be fantastic to be touched up with the darker green, but also some of the highlights could have that reflection of sky from that light blue. So a little bit of extreme. Now I think this is a too big brush for me to do the kind of more defined shapes. So I might need to change that one shortly. Couple of big strokes with a super dark color, and then change the brush. So again, I'm coming back to my key stalk. I can come back to some of these lovely seedlings. And it just disappears somewhere. Maybe just give it a bit more of a softness of a line. Let's get some of the shadows slightly stronger. So now, if earlier on I was more filling in spaces, now I'm going to look for patterns and look for creative strokes, which might lead me into a lovely shape, which will be perhaps balancing, okay, how that one's working, somewhere the shadow is. Where does it come from? It's coming from somewhere here. Okay, so I'm looking for those kind of patterns. So it's organically, naturally kind of becoming part of the painting. I can correct perhaps some of the directions here as well. They may have some parallel developments. Okay, some of these ones are a little bit too transparent strokes, but that's okay. So that's depth is a mid into the painting. Okay, something's coming here, so it's need to be supported with a depth. Okay, I think my colors are thinning down, so I just need topping them up with a bulkier paint. Okay, if I were to paint over some of my key barley grains, it's okay because I know where there will be left and right from that area. I think it would be easier for me just to do a whole shadow as I'm building it up. Otherwise, I'm losing the kind of the unity of this section. Yeah, so that one's coming here. Okay, that's good. And maybe some other pattern of darkness is going to be further somewhere here. It's almost like showing that width of the field again. Yes, it's getting slightly narrower there, but it's getting almost like wider as a gap of the dark. Okay, just continue this wave of the shadow here as well. Okay, I'm happy with that now. And for these blocks not to stand out like as individual shapes, I can just blend them perhaps with some of my lines. So then they start being part of that environment, not just blocks. Okay, so that's much more settles them in why they're there. Okay, that's better. Again, it's slightly reflecting first. Okay, let's see if I can flatten that surface. Right, that's good. While I'm on the same color, I'm just going to touch up my tree where I might have a little overworked my highlights. Just tone a couple of them down at the base. Don't look too similar. I think that should be enough for now. And let's work with some of the highlights. So when I used a bit of phthalo blue and white, now that's something we'd normally do at the end of the painting, but just to cheer it up and give it that dynamics, which will lead to support bring other colors to support it. I think it would be nice to bring a little bit of it. So white and phthalo blue. There might be some of that. It also will be extra coolness. Right, I might need to make it tiny bit more. Okay, that's too much darker, tiny bit more darker. So then I can still have extra highlights to add if I needed to. Okay, maybe something here. Slightly too big in size. So let's remove that. The fresh water, so my shadow remains lovely and dark. Okay, so maybe something. Something here. Sometimes it's difficult to know what it is you're painting, but sometimes those little hints are already in your piece. So all you need to do is to kind of to look for some of the glances of light without sometimes even knowing where they are, then part of the stem or they part of the elements which are still not there yet. Okay, some of that one might be coming through. Okay, not too much, so I'm not going to overwork them. Let's focus on kind of maybe some of the key of them. Okay, maybe behind this one, we've got some sort of light coming through. So again, so it will eventually become something at the back to support what we have at the front. We haven't done our poppies yet as well, so again, these will kind of will stay as our background fillers to a certain extent. So I'm not painting a specific section, yeah. I'm looking for those little glances of light, maybe tops of the grasses, maybe where they bend. Okay, that's too repetitive stroke. So let's remove that. Okay, I'm happy with that. Already we've got some sort of dynamics at the front, middle ground, but the foreground is much more life now. Good, now let's wash our brushes and introduce some of the reds. Right, now let's go for a medium-sized brush and let's do some flowers. I'll need again to start with some white and some crimson. Now my crimson on its own, it's quite a pinkish cool red. I want to make my poppies much more warmer. So I'm going to go for extra cadmium yellow and mix it really well. If we go too far, we might end up with too orangey color. So we want to stay dark red. So cadmium red, if you have got cadmium red, could be really good. But sometimes it's too transparent, so you will need some white still with it. And perhaps you will still need more cadmium red to make it darker. Sorry, crimson to make it darker. Okay, I think I'm much more happy with that one. Now, how we did paint the trees to make them softer, that's how I'd like us to start painting some of our flowers. So this is my main color. It's a little bit still transparent, so it needs that white base to it. But if I were to mix it, so this is more of a fresh color, but if I were to mix it with a dab of my green, okay, that's quite a lot of green. Okay, quite a lot of green. Let's have more crimson to it. Okay, it's too much green again. Hold on, I'll explain what I'm trying to do. So I'm looking how we were mixing kind of combination of color for the tree, but now we're going into the red. Okay. So we're going to start with slightly darker color, almost like a shadowy poppies before we introduce bold and strong red on top. So that's will help us to integrate it with the green. Also, our red is not going to be transparent, going over some of them fresher greens. So let's start with my key flower somewhere here. Okay, so it will be a little bit more hidden first. I'm going to make it quite big. Okay, somewhere there. There might be smaller ones. Let's find that spiral if we can still see it or imagine it. Blocks of flowers. I have another flower hidden somewhere here. I can do it almost hidden behind them. The stems, kind of just find them, or if you just do a block, that's fine as well, because we can come back to the shapes of the stems after. Okay, maybe that tells me that this flower could be slightly bigger. I prefer to exaggerate it. Yeah, it's our key component. There's a hidden flower somewhere here. And just do it as little blocks of strokes, perhaps. Any other hidden ones further? Okay, maybe another larger one somewhere in the corner. There will be loads of smaller ones further back. I'll do maybe on the edge of the field some of the larger ones again. And the rest will come in much more spread as highlights. Okay, so again, can I follow some of my straight lines? Okay, so I missed one more flower here, so that's how I check things out. So this color is this greeny red is perfect base color for the flowers to be introduced to the painting. Now, because it's of acrylics wetness, and then they might be a little bit harder to paint over while the strokes are wet, I'm going to let them dry. What I can do while the paint's still wet is introduce a little bit of violet for some of the darker sections of the painting of the flowers. I think I might need a smaller brush for that. So some violet with my red, or could be even with a dab of green. So I just don't want violet to be too fresh, natural violet. I want it to be part of that darker middles of the flowers. Some of them we'll see the flowers which are not opened yet. Okay, I've got quite a lot of shadows here, so it means that I'll need to bring maybe a highlight of greens in there. This one we'll see maybe more open as the petals are flopping about. Okay, there might be something else. I don't know if those are the seeds or it might be just part of them flower. Any other darks, maybe blocks of dots, suggestive the middles or the bottoms, where the stalk comes in, just very suggestive. Okay, I spotted another flower which I missed. Maybe just another little one. Okay. That's good. I need to wash my brush and come back to my pre-mixed bold red, cadmium red, or crimson and yellow. I think it's slightly dry for me. And I'll need quite a bit more, so I'm just going to top it up here. Also, my brush is clean, so I would have used all of my color too quickly. So touching this one up is good. Now putting two colors together, yeah, what I'll be working on gives me that opportunity as well to compare the contrast, to compare the strokes. Now I'll start doing small amounts. I will put a little bit of paler, perhaps pinkish color. You know how we've done the paler blues to reflect the skies? That's what I might do with the flowers as well. But I also want to have the glow of the poppies. Okay, glow of the poppies, those transparent strokes. Now, if your paints are still wet, that glow is not going to happen because the colors will start mixing and the freshness of the new strokes will be lost. So if you're starting to work and the colors are not so bold, this is why it is paints might be still too wet. I'm picking up quite thick layers, so quite thick volumes of color. A tiny bit of white with it. And not all the petals will need to have that color. Some of my flowers might get kind of in the shadow. Some of the flowers will only have perhaps the tops highlighted or maybe the borders. So be creative. Okay, this one might just have something. Okay, I think I have mixed a bit too much of the same of the two colors and they do look quite mucky there. So I think I'm going to use, I'm going to remove that color because I mixed in a mucky, dirty color. Maybe introduce my earlier shadowy reddish green. Gonna let it dry properly in this area. It's my key flower. I don't want it to be spoiled. Okay, that's good. And let's work now into some of the distant poppies. Now, they're not glowing as much. I think they're more of the darker version of the red, but they're a little bit lighter. So if I were to add white to my greenish red first, and I can just do a few dabs and see how they will appear. Maybe a little bit more red. Okay, and I can do some smaller dabs, some bigger dabs, a little bit more further in a distance. Okay, some of them might go a little bit more in a row, some of them will be just spread. Oh, don't want them to be perfectly polka dots like spread. Okay, so if you are spreading them, make that variety happen. Okay, so I've got one color, and I also want to have my orangey red. And again, I want it slightly lighter, perhaps to what it is on my palette. Now I want it to be glowing within my grasses. So I'll go next to some of my dots, or maybe over some of my dots of red, of the earlier reds. Just don't over make them too big, okay? So that's more busy. And also check that they don't appear like a fence, you know, becoming too regularly painted over one area, or yeah, maybe make one area more busy than the other. Okay, that's really exciting now. Definitely that flower still needs a bit of time for drying. So I'm going to leave those two brushes here, and I'm going to come back to some of my greens for touching points of the field and touching points of the foreground. Right, let's come back to some of the lighter greens. So I have some white. I have some emerald green. And I'm going to have some ochre. Okay, so some of the earlier greens were mixed will be really good. So we've got some nice sunny green now. I'm looking for a little bit more cheerful colors and lights for the background. Now for the flowers to stay at the back much more softer, I need to bring some of the greens just in front of them. Maybe again playing with light. I've got this little diagonal somewhere here. So maybe just watch me first how it will start, that light will start developing before you paint. I don't want too much broken areas. If I overdo it, I can always bring some more extra flowers over. Okay, and again, I'm immediately interacting my blocks. Remember how I was doing those shadows? Put some blocks, and then I kind of connected, kind of framed it. So I immediately have done a few blocks, and I immediately put some of the strokes of the taller grasses here. Okay, so something's going to come across here. That light is traveling. Don't want it as a line. I want it more of as a light. And maybe some of that light will also travel via some of the grasses and lines, kind of in this area, in all of that kind of area. So instead of painting it solid, this time I'll just put some extra highlights in these areas. Okay, for example, behind my poppy here. Okay, so where else that might take me? Okay, a little bit too much repetition, but there will be few of those grasses coming in. Sorry, those wheat and barley. I need to be careful not to maybe make them too similar as repetitive, or that rhythm will be continued via a different direction of the barley coming in, or maybe some of those seedlings will be getting lost a little. Also, the size of the shapes will start vary, perhaps here on the foreground. Lovely hair-like strokes. Just use tiny bit of extra water on your brush and just drag the strokes. They will become a bit more softer and easier to be dragged, almost like little prawns here. Those two. Okay. Let's get nice and exciting. Maybe in between darkness. So now it's tweaking the nuances on the foreground and backing them with what we already have. So for example, my key grass plant, I need some support by adding some more details to the stem. So we see the shadows and highlights on there. I'll come back with a darker color there. Maybe this shadow came out too dark and too intensive. Okay, so that warmth is coming through. It's a little bit broken down, almost like horizontally and vertically. So I need to kind of have that little bit of a balance. Or that change happening gentler. So let's use again some green and violet. And maybe bring that other branch which I've lost here, but it will be a bit more settled within that shadow. Right, what's at the front, what's at the back, what's more important, what's a little bit more hidden. They're different focus and different sections, so that playfulness of the light is overwhelming. So just try to keep things a bit more simple. Okay, that's good. If I have quite a lot of that yellowy green, I can add a dab of red to my green, make it more of an orangey green, red and still cadmium yellow. There'll be a little bit more interaction with another color, so it's just a tiny bit softer. And tweaking of some of the areas, maybe to support your flowers or shapes you need to clarify. Okay, that cleared some space for darker stem, perhaps, for that flower. Too much repetition there, that's okay now. Okay, so the grass is going in and out, they're all weaved in and out. So before I put all my super darks, just want to make sure that I have plenty of different directions of lights. Okay. My flower is still wet here. So to support one grass shape silhouette, I can introduce another silhouette next to it as a border, as a block. It's nice and busy. Right, a few more torches of the ducks. back to emerald green, violet and red. Or even perhaps ultramarine and green, my emerald green. Just not going to make it dark enough, so let's try a little bit of that color. Ultramarine, or fellow blue and green. Right, I wanted to make this. Yeah, it's going to be too. Let's give it a go. Let's give it a little bit longer time. Maybe a small amount of violet in it to give it a bit of depth. Already got some lovely build up for this plant. We've got already some of the lights and some of the darks of the stems and the seeds, so just need to touch things up along the way to kind of extra support it for it to start coming out in the foreground. Maybe adjust the highlights after this. I don't want it to be all too similar, so if it's seen there, need to disappear. Maybe another one of a slightly lighter tone will go behind it. Okay. It's kind of the tension works when it's supported with other plants. It looks some sort of other type of grass. And a couple of more lovely narrow barley branches. Just kind of coming into each other, kind of overlapping each other. Okay, that's giving me extra confidence on the strokes. And we'll just put a few of them. Further back. That's quite nice. Some of these shadows could be a little extra supported here. Okay. Nice darker stroke. Clarity. It's there and it disappears. My flower stalk has disappeared there as well, with any other darker ones. Right here in the center, as we're finishing things off. Okay. Nice and sharp. Any other darks to bring to the foreground. Or touches up to any of the shapes of the trees, just checking last few little segments, breaking down maybe some of the repetitive lines. I think I'm ready for my last stroke of the last strokes for my poppies, and I'm going to stop. So that was petal I wanted to reshape here with crimson and yellow and white, and also I wanted to touch up the same color with extra white. I just need some fresh white, just to touch up a couple of poppies. Okay, just got some green in that, so let's have some fresh red, a dab of yellow, quite a bit of white. Now I want it a bit more pink. If it comes out as more of a peachy color, maybe I just need to have some fresh crimson and white. As we said, we need to have that reflection of the sky in the petals as well. That's why that pink will, that cooler red and pink will be better option. So perhaps a few dabs. Again, don't just go everywhere, okay? Maybe for our key larger poppies, which will have that reflection on the flowers more than any other flowers. And if you are doing anything at the back, very, very gentle, very sensitive of how much and where. Right, let's just help out with the shape of this reflection of the petal. And I'll be stopping any moment. This is, it's still quite thick paint in there for me. I might have to let it dry and gently touch as it's dried. I want to see a bit more glow of light from underneath of it. And I can do it only with a stronger color. And the moment I start messing about with the previous layers, if they're wet, that glow is stopping. So I'll need to stop now and then touch it up as the surface is ready for it. Right, thank you very much for today. I look forward to seeing your finished paintings of the Poppies field, and you might want to join some more of my classes in the future. Thank you very much for today. Bye bye for now.